The day she left me, she didn't raise her voice. That's the part that still messes with my head. No screaming. No drama. No tears sliding down her cheeks like in the movies. Just calm. Controlled. Like she'd already grieved me weeks ago and was only now informing me of the result. We were sitting across from each other in our apartment. The one we'd sworn was temporary 3 years earlier. The afternoon light came through the window at an angle that made everything look softer than it deserved to be. Her coffee was untouched. Mine had gone cold. I knew something was wrong the moment she didn't ask how my day was. She folded her hands together and said my name the way people do when they're about to say something that can't be taken back. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," she said. That sentence alone made my chest tighten. When you're a man in your 30s, you learn to hear danger early. You hear it in pauses, in tone shifts, in the way someone avoids your eyes. She finally looked at me, and there was no anger there. No hatred. Just disappointment. "I can't do this anymore." Not because it was funny, but because my brain refused to process the words. "Do what?" I asked. "We've been through worse than this." She shook her head slowly. "That's the problem. It's always worse. And it's always potential. Someday. Eventually. When things work out." That word, potential, hit me harder than any insult could have. I'd built my entire identity on it. I leaned forward, elbows on my knees. "I'm trying," I said. "You know I am. I'm not giving up. I just need a little more time." She exhaled, like she'd already heard that line too many times. "I know you're trying. I really do. But trying isn't the same as building a life." The silence between us stretched. I could hear the refrigerator hum. A car passing outside. Life continuing like nothing important was happening. Then she said it. "I've met someone." The room felt smaller after that. Like the walls had leaned in. My throat went dry. "Someone?" She nodded. "He's stable. Established. He knows what he wants." I didn't ask the question right away, but it burned in my chest. "How long?" She hesitated just enough to tell me everything. "A few months. A few months. While I was working late. While I was stressing over bills. While I was telling myself that sacrifice now would mean comfort later." "And you're leaving me for him?" I asked quietly. She didn't flinch. "I'm choosing a future where I don't have to be afraid all the time." That was the moment something inside me cracked. Because it wasn't just about her anymore. It was about every fear I'd been carrying alone. The fear that I was falling behind, that I was running out of time, that one day I'd wake up and realize I'd worked myself into nothing. I wanted to tell her I loved her. Wanted to promise her everything would change. Wanted to swear I'd become the man she needed. But all of that sounded weak even in my own head. So I asked the question that had been screaming inside me since she opened her mouth. "Is it because he has more money than me?" She didn't answer right away. That pause told me everything. She finally said, "It's not just money. It's security, confidence, direction." Each word landed like a verdict. I nodded slowly, even though my chest felt like it was collapsing. "Right?" I said. "Of course." She stood up, already emotionally gone. "I hope you understand someday." I watched her walk into the bedroom. The same bedroom where we talked about kids, about names, about the kind of parents we'd be. I heard drawers open. A suitcase unzip. I didn't follow her. Because some part of me knew, if I did, I'd beg. And I couldn't survive watching myself do that. When she came back out, her suitcase was half full. She stopped at the door, hand on the handle. "You're a good man," she said softly. "You really are. But not enough. Not successful. Not chosen. Just good." The door closed behind her with a sound that felt final. I sat there for a long time after she left. Long enough for the sun to dip lower, casting shadows across the floor. Long enough for my phone to buzz with a notification I didn't check. I stared at the wall and replayed every decision I'd made over the last decade. The risks I didn't take. The promotions I missed. The nights I chose work over rest, believing effort alone would eventually be rewarded. What she didn't know, what no one knew, was that money had never been the real problem. Because the truth was, I'd grown up surrounded by more money than I could ever spend. I just wasn't allowed to touch it. My family believed money was a test. A temptation. Something that revealed who you really were when life got hard. So they hid it behind rules and conditions and lectures about character. And I obeyed. I chose struggle because I thought it would make me worthy. Sitting alone in that apartment, I wondered, for the first time in my life, if I'd been wrong. If obedience had cost me love. If pride had cost me happiness. I picked up my phone and opened a photo she'd sent me months earlier. We were smiling. Happy. Or at least pretending to be. I deleted it. Not because I hated her. But because I needed to see what was left when she was gone. As night settled in, one thought kept repeating in my head, quiet but relentless. If she knew the truth, would she have stayed? That question followed me into the dark. And it would change everything. I grew up believing money was dangerous. Not because we didn't have it, but because we had too much of it. That was the lesson drilled into me long before I understood numbers, long before I knew what a balance sheet was or how interest worked. Money in my family wasn't freedom. It was a test. A mirror. Something that revealed whether you were weak enough to let it define you. The night she left, that belief sat beside me in the dark like an old ghost. I lay on the couch instead of the bed. The sheets still smelled like her, and I didn't trust myself not to drown in that if I went in there. The apartment felt hollow, like a shell someone had already abandoned. Every sound echoed louder than it should have. That's when the memories started creeping in. My father's voice was always the first. Comfort makes men soft. He used to say it casually, like it was an obvious fact, like gravity. We'd be driving past gated communities, and I'd stare out the window at houses that looked like resorts. Pools. Tennis courts. Security gates. I once asked him why we didn't live in a place like that. He didn't even look at me when he answered. Because nothing built easily lasts. At the time, I believed him. Our house was modest. Nice, but never flashy. No signs of wealth. No displays. But there were clues if you knew where to look. Quiet phone calls late at night. Meetings with men in tailored suits who never stayed long. Conversations that stopped when I walked into the room. When I was 18, my father finally sat me down. It wasn't dramatic. No ceremony. Just a conversation at the kitchen table, like he was explaining the rules of a game I'd already been playing my whole life. There's money set aside for you, he said. Enough that you'd never have to worry if you chose the easy road. I remember my heart racing. Not with excitement, but with confusion. Then why am I working 3 jobs? I asked. He met my eyes for the first time. Because if you touch it too soon, it will ruin you. That was the rule. No inheritance until I'd built something on my own. No safety net. No shortcuts. The money wasn't a reward, it was leverage, only to be used once I'd proven I could stand without it. I agreed. Not because I fully understood, but because I wanted his respect more than comfort. That choice followed me into adulthood. Every time I struggled, I told myself it was character being forged. Every time I watched others surge ahead, I told myself I was earning something deeper. More real. But lying on that couch, staring at the ceiling, I wondered if I'd been confusing discipline with punishment. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. A message from my mother. Your father heard about the breakup. I stared at the screen for a long time before responding. I'm fine, I typed. A lie so automatic it barely registered. Another message came almost immediately. He wants to talk to you. My chest tightened. Talking to my father was never casual. It was always measured. Purposeful. Like each word had weight behind it. I didn't call back right away. Instead, I sat there and thought about her words. I can't build a future on potential anymore. She wasn't wrong. Potential doesn't pay rent. It doesn't quiet anxiety at night. It doesn't make a woman feel safe planning a life. And yet, what she didn't know was that I'd been choosing potential on purpose. I finally called. My father answered on the second ring. You all right? I've been better. There was a pause. Then, heartbreak will either sharpen you or rot you. That part is your choice. I clenched my jaw. You think this is about weakness? I think it's about priorities, he said calmly. And timing. I exhaled slowly. She left because I wasn't enough. No, he said. She left because she wanted certainty you haven't earned yet. That word again. Earned. And what if I never earn it? I asked. Another pause, longer this time. Then the money was never the problem. The call ended shortly after. No comfort. No reassurance. Just the same philosophy I'd lived under my entire life. I set the phone down and stared at my hands. They were calloused. Tired. Proof of effort. But effort hadn't kept her. That night I opened the locked folder on my laptop, the one I rarely touched. Inside were documents I'd avoided for years. Trust structures. Accounts. Numbers so large they didn't feel real. Over $100 million. The number sat there, emotionless. Enough to erase every struggle I'd ever had. Enough to make her stay. Enough to change how the world treated me overnight. My stomach turned. Because if I used it now, everything my father warned me about would come true. Or so I'd been told. I closed the folder without making a move. Instead, I stood up and walked to the window. The city lights glowed in the distance. Somewhere out there, she was probably laughing. Relaxed. With him. I rested my forehead against the glass. For the first time, I allowed myself to ask a question I'd never dared to voice. What if I wasn't being noble? What if I was just afraid? Afraid of failing even with everything handed to me. Afraid of proving my father right or wrong. Afraid that without struggle, I wouldn't know who I was. The money wasn't just a secret. It was a mirror. And for the first time, I didn't like what I saw reflected back at me. As I turned away from the window, my phone buzzed again. A notification from social media. Her name. I didn't open it. But I knew one thing with absolute clarity as I sat back down in the dark. This secret, the one I was raised to hide, wasn't going to stay buried much longer. And when it surfaced, nothing in my life would remain the same. I didn't go looking for proof. That's the lie I tell myself when I'm being kind. The truth is, loneliness has a way of dragging you toward pain when you don't give it something else to hold. And that morning, 3 days after she left, the apartment was too quiet. Too still. Like it was waiting for me to admit something. So I opened my phone. Her profile was still there. Public. Untouched. Like she hadn't just detonated my life. The first photo loaded slowly, pixel by pixel, as if the universe was giving me time to back out. I didn't. She was standing on a balcony I didn't recognize, sunlight on her face, hair caught mid-laugh. A champagne flute in her hand. Behind her, the city stretched out like it belonged to her. The caption was short. New beginnings. My chest tightened in a way I hadn't felt before, not sharp like the breakup, but dull and heavy. Like something sinking where my confidence used to be. I scrolled. Another photo. A restaurant I'd only ever seen online. White tablecloths. Candlelight. A man's hand visible at the edge of the frame. Expensive watch. Casual confidence. I didn't need to see his face to know exactly who he was. This was the man she chose. Not just because he had money, but because his life already looked finished. Complete. Framed. I tossed the phone onto the couch and stood up, pacing the apartment like an animal trapped in a space too small for its thoughts. I told myself I wasn't jealous. I was angry. Angry that effort didn't count. Angry that sacrifice didn't show up in photos. Angry that no one applauds the man still building. Later that afternoon, I left the apartment. I didn't know where I was going, only that staying inside felt like suffocating. The city was alive in a way I wasn't. People moved with purpose. Talked about plans. Futures. I walked past a cafe and saw them. Her. And him. They were sitting by the window, close enough that their shoulders touched. He leaned back in his chair, relaxed, like time bent around him instead of the other way around. She was talking animatedly, her hands moving the way they used to when she was excited with me. I froze. My first instinct was to turn away. To pretend I hadn't seen them. But my feet didn't listen. I stood there, invisible on the sidewalk, watching the life I'd been replaced in. He smiled at something she said. Not impressed, amused. Like someone used to being admired. I hated him instantly. Not because he stole her, but because he didn't look like he'd ever had to doubt himself. She laughed. That sound hit me harder than anything else. Because it wasn't forced. It was free. A voice inside me whispered, "You could end this right now." One sentence. "My family is worth over $100 million. I imagined walking in, watching his expression change, watching her eyes widen, watching regret bloom where certainty lived now. For a moment, the fantasy tasted sweet. Then something else followed. Hollowness. Because if I did that, if I revealed the truth just to reclaim her, then everything my father warned me about would be proven right. I wouldn't be chosen. I'd be bought. My phone buzzed in my pocket, snapping me out of the spiral. A message from my younger cousin. "Saw your ex today. Damn it. That guy she's with is loaded." I didn't reply. I turned and walked away before they could see me. That night, the comparisons came in waves. His car versus mine. His suit versus my worn jackets. His certainty versus my questions. I lay awake replaying every conversation I'd ever had with her, searching for the exact moment I'd lost ground. Had it been the night I said no to a vacation because I needed to save? The promotion that never came? The way I talked about the future like it was always a step away? Around midnight, I opened my laptop. Not to look at the accounts. To look at myself. I pulled up old resumes. Project notes. Business ideas I'd half finished and abandoned when fear crept in. The pattern was impossible to ignore. I didn't fail because I wasn't capable. I failed because I was terrified of committing to one version of myself. If I chose one path, I couldn't hide behind potential anymore. And potential had been my shield. Just before I closed the laptop, a notification popped up. Her name. A message. "I hope you're doing okay." I stared at it, my heart pounding. The urge to reply, to be polite, restrained, impressive, was overwhelming. I typed 3 different responses. Deleted all of them. Finally, I locked the phone and set it face down. For the first time since she left, I didn't want her validation. I wanted my own. I stood at the window again, city lights blinking like distant signals. Somewhere out there, she was building a life with someone else. And here I was, stripped of excuses. No relationship to save. No image to maintain. Just me. And the uncomfortable truth that watching her choose him hurt. But it also clarified something I'd been avoiding for years. I wasn't losing because I lacked resources. I was losing because I hadn't decided who I was willing to become. That realization didn't fix anything. But it lit a fire. And once it started burning, I knew it wouldn't let me go back to sleep. The call came the morning I finally stopped pretending I was fine. I was shaving, staring at my reflection like it belonged to someone else. Eyes tired, jaw tighter than it used to be, when my phone vibrated against the sink. I already knew who it was before I checked. My mother never called this early unless something had shifted. "Your father wants to see you," she said when I answered. No greeting. No small talk. "When?" "Today." I rinsed the razor and watched the foam spiral down the drain. Today felt deliberate. Like a move on a chessboard. We met at his office, not the house. That alone told me this wasn't a family conversation, it was a business one. The building was quiet, all glass and muted colors. Power disguised as restraint. My father stood by the window when I walked in, hands clasped behind his back, looking out at the city like it owed him something. He didn't turn around right away. "You look thinner," he said. "I've been busy." "With what?" I didn't answer. We both knew the truth. Losing sleep. Losing ground. Losing someone. He finally faced me and gestured to the chair across from his desk. I stayed standing. "This isn't about sympathy," he said calmly. "So don't mistake it for that." I wouldn't. The pause. Heavy. Intentional. "You've reached an inflection point," he continued. "Most men don't realize when they're standing at one. They just drift past it and blame the world later." I crossed my arms. "And you're here to save me?" His eyes sharpened. "No. I'm here to offer you leverage." The word landed exactly the way he intended. He slid a folder across the desk. Inside were numbers I already knew, presented in a way that stripped them of fantasy. No yachts. No mansions. Just structures. Pathways. Control. "You'll have limited access," he said. Investment capital only. No lifestyle upgrades. No public displays. No shortcuts to validation. I almost laughed. So I get the weight without the reward. You get responsibility, he corrected. For the first time. I looked at the papers, then back at him. Why now? Because loss has clarified you, he said. Pain focuses men faster than comfort ever could. I felt a flash of anger. So she had to leave for you to decide I was ready? She was never the variable, he said evenly. You were. Silence filled the room. Part of me wanted to tear the folder in half. Another part wanted to grab it and never look back. What happens if I fail? I asked. Then you'll know, he said. And so will I. I clenched my jaw. This wasn't help. It was a test with teeth. I left the office without giving him an answer. Outside, the city felt louder. Faster. Like it was daring me to keep up. I walked for hours, replaying his words. Leverage. Responsibility. Inflection point. The truth was uncomfortable. I'd been hiding behind struggle because it was familiar. Because it gave me an excuse when things didn't work. If I accepted the offer, there would be nowhere left to hide. That night, I opened the folder again at my kitchen table. The apartment no longer felt like ours. Just mine. Temporary. I imagined telling her. Not to win her back, but to justify myself. And that thought alone told me I wasn't ready. My phone buzzed. A text from my mother. You don't have to prove anything to us. I stared at the message, then typed back. I have to prove it to myself. I signed the agreement just before midnight. Not with excitement. With resolve. Because accepting the offer meant something deeper than money. It meant stepping into a version of myself that couldn't blame timing, or circumstance, or anyone else. As I closed the folder, one thought settled in with quiet certainty. If I was going to rebuild my life, I would do it on my terms. Not to impress her. Not to satisfy my father. But to finally answer the question that had been haunting me since the day she walked out the door. Who am I when I stop hiding? The first thing I learned after signing the agreement was how quiet progress really is. No announcements. No applause. No moment where the world suddenly recognizes you've decided to take yourself seriously. Just mornings that start earlier than they used to. I stopped sleeping in the bed altogether. Not because it hurt less, but because I needed distance from the version of myself who used to lie there scrolling through dreams instead of building them. I woke before sunrise, brewed coffee strong enough to sting, and sat at the small kitchen table with a notebook and a laptop that had seen better days. I told myself this wasn't about proving anything. That was another lie. At first, it was absolutely about proving something, to my father, to her, to the part of me that still flinched when I remembered the word potential. But motivation is allowed to be messy in the beginning. What mattered was that I showed up. I didn't chase flashy ideas. No grand visions meant to impress investors or strangers online. I focused on problems I understood. Gaps I'd seen firsthand while struggling. Inefficiencies that cost people time, money, energy. Things I could explain without rehearsing. The first few weeks were brutal. I moved money cautiously, almost fearfully. Every decision felt heavier knowing there was real leverage behind it now. No excuses, no heroic narrative of suffering to soften failure. When the first deal fell apart, I didn't tell anyone. I sat alone in the apartment, staring at the rejection email, waiting for the familiar spiral to start. It didn't. Instead, I felt something sharper. Responsibility. Failure wasn't an identity anymore. It was information. So I adjusted. I asked better questions. Read slower. Listened longer. I stopped pretending confidence meant certainty and started treating it like a muscle, trained through repetition, not ego. Some days I worked 16 hours and accomplished almost nothing. Other days, one decision moved everything forward. That inconsistency used to terrify me. Now it grounded me. About a month in, my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. "You don't know me," the voice said when I answered. "But I heard you're serious." That word again. Serious. I smiled without realizing it. We met in a coffee shop that smelled like burned beans and ambition. He talked fast. I listened. When he asked what I wanted out of this, I surprised myself by answering honestly. I want something that works, I said. Even when no one's watching. He studied me for a moment, then nodded. That's rare. The partnership wasn't perfect. We argued. We missed targets. We learned. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't building in reaction to fear. I was building in alignment. The money stayed quiet. No upgrades. No symbols. My car stayed the same. My clothes stayed simple. Not because I was afraid to spend, but because I didn't need camouflage anymore. Confidence has a strange effect when it's earned. You stop checking reflections. You stop rehearsing conversations. You stop wondering who's winning. One evening, months later, I ran into someone I hadn't seen since before the breakup. He looked me up and down, curious. You look different, he said. How? Calmer. Like you're not chasing something. I nodded. I found what I was avoiding. That night, alone again in the apartment, I realized something else had changed. I hadn't checked her social media in weeks. The absence of that habit felt better than any win. When her name finally did resurface, this time in a message forwarded by a mutual friend, I felt a flicker of something. Not longing. Not anger. Just distance. She heard you're doing well, the message read. I stared at the words, waiting for satisfaction to arrive. It didn't. Because doing well wasn't the point anymore. I closed the chat and returned to the work in front of me. Late one night, as rain streaked the windows and the city blurred into abstraction, I caught my reflection in the dark glass. Same face. Different posture. I thought about the money, still there, still quiet, and understood something my father never said out loud. The test wasn't whether I'd use it. The test was whether I'd let it use me. By the time the first real success came, not a windfall, not a headline, just steady validation, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt grounded. Like I'd finally stepped into my own weight. And for the first time since she walked away, I wasn't curious whether she'd notice. Because what I was building wasn't meant to be seen. It was meant to last. As I shut down my laptop and leaned back in the chair, a thought surfaced, not loud, not dramatic, but unmistakable. If she ever came back into my life, it wouldn't be because of money. It would be because I was no longer hiding from myself. And that realization, quiet, earned, irreversible, told me the hardest part was still ahead. I didn't plan for her to find out. That's important. Because if I had planned it, if I had engineered the reveal the way my ego once fantasized about, it would have meant I was still living for the reaction. The truth surfaced quietly, like most things that matter do. I was in the middle of a meeting when my phone vibrated on the table. I ignored it at first. Then it buzzed again. And again. I glanced down, irritated, expecting a minor fire I'd need to put out. Her name. For a split second, my chest tightened the way it used to. Muscle memory. Then it loosened. I didn't open the message until after the meeting ended. Can we talk? It read. No emojis. No filler. Just those 3 words. I stared at the screen, noticing how different the moment felt from the dozens of times I'd imagined it. There was no rush of validation. No spike of triumph. Just curiosity, and a faint warning bell somewhere in the back of my mind. We met at a neutral place. A quiet bar halfway between our old life and whatever we'd become since. I arrived early, not to prepare lines, but because punctuality had become a form of respect I extended to myself. When she walked in, I barely recognized the version of me who used to fall apart at the sight of her. She looked the same. Polished. Confident. Comfortable. But her eyes searched the room in a way they never used to. She sat across from me, folding her hands the same way she had the day she left. For a moment, neither of us spoke. I didn't know, she finally said. I raised an eyebrow. About? She exhaled. Your family. The money. There was no dramatic reveal. No confrontation. Just information catching up to timing. I never hid it, I said calmly. I just didn't use it. She frowned slightly. But you could have. Yes. And you didn't tell me? I met her eyes. You never stayed long enough to ask. The words landed harder than I expected. Not because they were cruel, but because they were true. She looked away. I found out through someone else. They said you're doing really well. I smiled faintly. I'm doing honest. She studied me then. Not the way she used to, measuring potential, but like she was recalibrating. I made a mistake, she said quietly. There was. The sentence I'd replayed in my head 100 times. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like a test. I chose certainty, she continued. I thought I needed it. But certainty isn't the same as peace. I nodded, letting her words exist without rushing to fill the space. She leaned forward. If I'd known. I held up a hand. That's not a road we're going to walk down, I said gently. Her eyes widened. Why not? Because if you'd stayed for the money, you wouldn't have stayed for me. Silence stretched between us. She swallowed. I'm not that shallow. I know, I said. That's what makes this harder. She looked at me like she was seeing a stranger wearing my face. You've changed. Yes. And you don't need me anymore. The realization seemed to land as she said it out loud. I considered my answer carefully. I don't need anyone to validate who I am, I said. That includes you. Her shoulders slumped, not in defeat, but in understanding. We talked for another hour. About small things. Neutral things. The past without rewriting it. When we stood to leave, she hesitated. I'm happy for you, she said. Truly. I believed her. Outside, the night air felt lighter than I remembered. I walked without replaying the conversation, without dissecting every word. Because the power shift everyone imagines in moments like this isn't about who wants whom more. It's about who no longer needs the outcome. As I drove home, one thought stayed with me. If she'd found out earlier, I might have lost everything trying to prove something. Instead, she found out when it no longer mattered. And that told me the work was doing exactly what it was supposed to do. The chapter with her wasn't reopening. It was closing. Calmly. Deliberately. On my terms. I used to think power was volume. The louder voice. The bigger presence. The ability to walk into a room and bend attention toward yourself without asking for it. That illusion followed me for years. It whispered that if I just had more money, status, certainty, everything would finally fall into place. After meeting her, I realized how wrong that was. Power, real power, is quiet. It shows up in restraint, in choice, in the ability to walk away from outcomes that once controlled you. A week after we talked, my father called. Not to ask how it went. Not to offer commentary. Just to tell me he wanted dinner. We met at his house this time. The one he'd always insisted was enough, despite the world he could have bought instead. The table was set simply. No staff. No ceremony. He poured wine without asking if I wanted any. You look settled, he said. I am. He nodded once, as if confirming something he'd already suspected. She reached out to you, he said. I didn't ask how he knew. Yes. And? I held his gaze. It's done. A long silence followed. Then he leaned back slightly. That tells me more than anything else you could have said. I frowned. You always said money reveals character. But you never explained what power actually was. A faint smile crossed his face. Because it can't be taught. It has to be discovered. I exhaled slowly. I don't want to be rich. That got his attention. I want to be solid, I continued. Unshakable. Someone who isn't altered by who stays or who leaves. He studied me like a man watching a structure finally hold its own weight. You've crossed the line most men never do, he said. You stopped performing. The words landed deeper than praise. Later that night, alone again, I thought about how much energy I'd wasted chasing a version of masculinity that required constant proof. The flex. The win. The comparison. All of it fragile. All of it dependent. I realized something uncomfortable. If she had come back that night and asked me to try again, the answer would have still been no. Not because I didn't care, but because I finally cared more about what it took to become this version of myself. Power wasn't getting the last word. Power was not needing it. The business continued to grow, not explosively, but correctly. Problems still showed up. So did doubt. But they no longer threatened my identity. One evening, as I reviewed numbers that actually meant something now, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. "Just wanted to say congratulations," the voice said. "I heard what you're building." "Thank you," I replied. There was a pause. "You don't sound surprised." "I stopped being surprised by progress," I said. "It comes from consistency." When the call ended, I sat back and let the quiet settle. This was the moment I'd been chasing without realizing it. Not applause. Not recognition. Alignment. I walked to the window and looked out at the city. The same lights. The same movement. But I no longer felt small inside it. I belonged to myself now. And that was a form of power no amount of money could buy. The life I chose didn't arrive all at once. There was no ceremony. No dramatic sunrise moment where everything suddenly made sense. It revealed itself quietly, through repetition, through mornings that felt steady instead of urgent, through decisions that didn't need witnesses. I moved out of the apartment a month later. Not because it hurt anymore, but because it no longer fit. I packed my things with a kind of calm I didn't recognize as my own. The walls were bare by the time I left, the echoes gone. I handed in the keys without looking back. The new place was smaller, cleaner, intentional. A desk by the window. Plants I actually watered. Silence that didn't accuse me. I slept better there. Work continued, not as a chase, but as a practice. Meetings became conversations. Decisions became commitments. I stopped asking what something made me look like and started asking what it made me better at. The money stayed where it was supposed to be. Quiet. Useful. Unimpressive to strangers. And for the first time, impressive to me. I saw my father less, but when we did speak, there was an ease between us that hadn't existed before. No instruction. No correction. Just respect moving in both directions. One evening, over a simple dinner, he said, "You built your spine." I nodded. That felt accurate. Dating returned to my life the way sleep had, gradually, without desperation. I met people without auditioning. I listened more than I explained. When something didn't align, I didn't try to force it into meaning. I learned the difference between attraction and approval. Between chemistry and character. Between being wanted and being understood. One night, walking home after a quiet date that ended honestly instead of dramatically, I realized I hadn't thought about her in weeks. Not because I'd erased her, but because she'd taken her proper place, in the past. Sometimes, on rare evenings, I'd catch a glimpse of a life I could have lived. A shortcut. A different version of success. The thought no longer tempted me. Because shortcuts always collect their debt later. And I was finally debt-free. The business reached a point where people started calling it successful. I didn't correct them. I also didn't let the word carry me away. Success, I learned, is a side effect. Identity is the foundation. One afternoon, as I wrapped up a long week, I stood by the window and watched the city settle into itself. Same lights. Same movement. Same noise. Different man. I thought back to the question that once haunted me. If she knew the truth, would she have stayed? The answer came easily now. Maybe. But it wouldn't have mattered. Because staying isn't the same as choosing. And I finally knew what it meant to choose myself. I didn't win her back. I didn't prove anyone wrong. I didn't arrive with a reveal. I arrived with alignment. With work I respected. With values that didn't bend. With a life that didn't need to be defended. That was the fortune my family never talked about. The one you earn when you stop hiding. And it was worth more than anything I'd ever been afraid to touch.